you're one of our haters who are out there watching.
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like what?
If Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies. Feels like a party.
Stop that. It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie, I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't care.
This is 6 Degrees of Stew. You don't need to stay meta, but I'm glad you're here.
Feel special, and they give you a sense of purpose and identity along with community, and that was a hook.
I'm resistant to your description, and I'll tell you why if I can. And that is because what I've learned about the mind and about social influence is that the public tends to blame the victim as if they were weak and that's why they got in, or vulnerable and that's why they got in. And I think human beings are being human.
You just said you were vulnerable, though.
To influence.
Well, unlike you, I wasn't particularly vulnerable at the time, so it was a good time for them to get after me because I was in the middle of some pretty intense stuff. I had a goal. I was pretty focused. I wasn't get roped up in some religion, but if they got me a couple of years earlier, I think they could have got me. I was real vulnerable when I was like 18.
So the reality is as human beings, we have life cycle events where we're situationally vulnerable. Death of a loved one,
right.
Breakup of a relationship, moving to a new city, state, or country, illness. There are things that every human being goes through, and for me is a overwhelming ignorance of the public to kind of blame the victims, like you were stupid for believing in this, like what was wrong with you, you were weak for falling for this, as opposed to tell me about your experience and tell me what happened. Influence of all types, and some good, some bad, etc. And I honestly wasn't looking to leave my family, drop out of college.
I don't think anybody was. That's why I say I don't fault Stephen. I do think he was susceptible, though.
People without a hesitation if I was ordered to
for
do
various
so.
reasons, not just the girlfriend.
But I had friends. I had great family. I lived in this same house. My parents were there for 55 years. Like, I knew all the neighbors. They knew us. It was a very tight-knit feeling community. So it was, and I was living at home while I was going to Queens College and working on the weekends. So it doesn't really fit in my experience. But again, as I've learned more about social influence and hypnosis, what I was doing before was a hypnotic voice, the deep voice, where you're using the pacing.
We'll discuss
I'm not going to do more of that.
Too.
But
we'll see when he gets into it. It might be the next episode.
When somebody's talking like that for any amount of time, and the only option is to get up and walk out, or get up and start walking back and forth and keep meta commenting on what the person in the front is talking about.
So you want to resist the suggestion that you were vulnerable in any way.
I was vulnerable. I was horny. I was
horny.
Down. I thought I would get lucky with one of the three women, honestly.
But also, they were telling you there's a purpose. There
was a bait and switch. I was not interested in joining a group. I was not interested in changing a religion.
They did tell you there's some big purpose that you're meant for, and you could come be an important part of it.
Absolutely.
And that it made you feel like you were part of something big.
Special, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was my Japanese lead central role in my recruitment indoctrination, and he played a role unlike my father. And this is again, myself with good therapists.
He'll talk a lot about his Japanese leader, and I covered them briefly in different parts of the first few episodes when I broke down the history of the Moonies, the beginning, and how they formed. And I will talk about Stephen's relationship too when it's appropriate, and cut in the sections that go along here.
Over the years, my father was very stoic and unemotional. He almost never hugged me, or his father had been an alcoholic. He died when I was very young. I never knew my grandfather. But my grandfather apparently had an alcoholism problem and would throw things at my father and things.
Really sad.
My father's idea of a good father was a father who doesn't drink and doesn't hit his kids. Mm-hmm. But he rarely would be, Steve, I'm so proud of you. You're so smart. In fact, my father never went to college. He was very bright, but I felt always... Like, I remember asking him to help me with a third grade mathematics thing, and he was intimidated because he didn't know. I don't know what it was, if it was something like that. And it seemed so simple to me, but for him, he was intimidated. So what I'm trying to get at is my father, I'll give you a story that later got resolved in therapy, but I did I think it was a history regents, in New York. There was like a statewide test for competency or whatever. I think it was American history. And I got a 97 out of 100. And one other person got a 97, and almost the whole state flunked that test. And half of the test was essays, so it wasn't like multiple choice guesswork. I got 97. He said, "So what happened to the 3 points?" And the guy in the Moonies,
really sad. He's always
my surrogate
his father's approval.
Father figure, like, you're special. You have no idea what God has in mind for you. For me, with my father, he didn't beat me, but he didn't hug me. He didn't, give me a lot of praise when I was growing up, because his father never gave him that. And instead of, when I was in therapy, instead of being angry at him, me stepping into his shoes as a child, realizing he was doing the best that he could. And at 30, when I saw him, I just started hugging him, and he'd be like a board, and I'd just say, stand there, because I need a hug. And by the time he was in his 80s, he was actually wanting the hug, and he
took
was
50 years.
Yeah, yeah, it took 50 years. He actually said, "I love you, and I'm proud of you." He died at 92, but I got to see my father evolve. And you have a major role to play in the history of humankind. And in the Moonies, the ideology is you have 10 generations of your ancestors in the spirit world on your mother's and father's side, and they're all stuck in low levels, and you need to do good acts to give them good spiritual vitality elements to help elevate them. So there's this huge feeling of pressure and guilt to be a good Moonie, because all of these beings will accuse you for eternity if you ever betray God and leave and all of that crap. So, and I guess I'm the kind of person that if I'm going to do something, I want to do it to the best of my ability. And I can honestly tell you, when I was in college and I had to stand up and read a poem to a class of 20 others, I was shy and I was embarrassed. The Moonies would stick me on a stage in front of hundreds of people or 1,000 people, and I was speaking. I liked the feeling of speaking.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I can credit my cult membership, that they taught me about how to run a business and how to public speak and how to go on 3 hours of sleep a night for 7 days a week. And
I'm going to ask you to do something that maybe you're not prepared to do, but I'm going to give it a try. Let's just say you had 1 minute or a minute and a half in an elevator, and you had to describe the most important Mooney beliefs, like the elevator pitch of Mormons call it the plan of salvation. It's like, here it is. You were spirits in before heaven. God sent us to earth to get a body so that you could have experiences on earth. But we all sinned, so God sent Jesus to atone for our sins.
I don't know if I can do it in a minute. Can I do 2?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
So Almighty God is perfect and wanted to create the perfect expression of his love. He created Adam and Eve. Before they reached maturity, Lucifer had sexual hard-on for Eve and had sex with her, and she had sex with Adam, bringing in a fall of man, all this satanic evil blood lineage. All of human history is to restore that ideal world. Jesus failed his mission.
What?
Totally. I can't say totally. He half failed his mission because John the Baptist was supposed to become his disciple. The Jews were supposed to march on Rome and take over Rome. And John the Baptist failed. And Jesus was the result of a woman and a man, not virgin birth. And Jesus lost faith on the cross even, but he offered spiritual salvation. He asked Moon. So history was trying to purify blood lineage from Israel to Korea. And the new Messiah is Sun Myung Moon, who was asked by Jesus to complete his failed mission to restore the world to God. And we're supposed to all speak Korean. All religions will be abolished. And democracy is satanic. And it should be a hegemonic, nepotistic system. And the thing that made the Moonies so famous were the mass weddings, where Moon would line up thousands of male and female devotees and say, you and you, you and you, you and, because he supposedly could read everything about your spirit and know everything because he was the perfect sinless Adam. And you were supposed to have 5 minutes to decide whether you want to do what God wants for you. And of course, almost everybody said yes to the match. Then you were split and you had to hit each other with a wooden stick on the butt as hard as possible, male hitting the female on the butt, to root out and pay indemnity for the sin of Adam and Eve having, illicit sex. Then people would be separated. But the point is, these people didn't know each other. They didn't consent. Many didn't speak the same languages, and they were often sent off on missions where they didn't even see each other for years. And what else? They want to take over the world. They think everything other than them is evil and needs to be restored. And the Moonies are still very active to this day.
Wow.
Still recruiting
really quickly,
on college
the Bible
campuses.
Says explicitly that Mary was a virgin. Like, how did they get around parts of that theology and doctrine that you just told me when it contradicts with the actual phraseology of the Bible?
So now we're getting into theology, and that's not my strength, but I can tell you that much of the New Testament was mistranslations of the Hebrew scriptures. No, according to scholars, and the word for maiden is not the same as virgin.
Okay, so they would have said virgin is a mistranslation.
Yeah, and one of the big appeals of the Moonies is they were going to unite science and religion. They actually had Nobel scientists, and they would spend millions of dollars doing this conference for the unity of the sciences and religions. And they would quote Einstein, they would quote other famous people to portray that we really are grounded in reality. It's not just poofy, religious beliefs, but we're about restoring, true love. But coming back to the mass weddings, you have to understand Moon was married many times before the current woman who's running the group now, and had a child out of wedlock and all kinds of other affairs, even though members were not allowed to masturbate or ever have sex without permission with their assigned partner. So there's a whole dark side of the actual cult.
So that was beautiful. You knocked it out of the park.
Oh.
Great job. Thank you.
I don't know if other former Moonies would have said, but you forgot.
Well, they're not on more
the histories of the parallels of the history of restoration. That's a good one.
The shock look on my face was because I broke
they
my
have a
elevated
timeline where they try to predict that the Messiah is born between 1917 and 1930. And Moon was conveniently born in 1920.
I'll have to get my gorilla
and
super
as
glue.
a lecturer, as was done when I was being recruited and indoctrinated, the lecturer would say, and you can go to the library and you can open up the history textbooks and you can check this out, that this is true. And I would repeat that same BS. Only when I checked it out, the timelines were wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Like not even close.
So
Big lie.
Yeah. A+ on describing an introduction to Mooney doctrine and theology. Will you now back up and tell us the history of Sun Myung Moon and what we know about his life before he started this church, and just a little bit about he's passed away now.
2012. Yeah. So I want to invite people to come to freedomofmind.com. I have lots of documents, including a former government subcommittee investigation on Korean CIA activities in the United States on the Moonies. And again, you need to understand that I was told certain things in the cult as a leader, and I had maybe 100 leadership meetings where I was in the room with Moon, where I was bowing to the floor before him. There was one point where he was redoing the leadership and ordering all the American leaders to 120-day training, and he basically said I graduated the 120-day training because my leader Kamiyama said I was too important.
We're going to get there. But just go to his history real quick.
So he was raised Presbyterian in North Korea. Of course, the Korean War happened. He was in a concentration camp, I am told, by the communists, which is probably where he learned a lot about how to do mind control and brainwashing. But what I know of him really, no one's asked me this question in a long, long time.
So interesting that
but what
he
I want to say is that his group, he was in a...
What's interesting to me is I spent so much time, and I wasn't in the Moonies, right? But this is what he's built his career off of. And this is what he discusses all the time. And the fact that he can't just talk about Moon and his life and where he's come from and the things he has done. I just found recently too, in furthering my research on Dr. Stephen Hassan, he even comes across a gentleman who interviewed people who were involved with the tragedy of the Six Marys, which was the stuff that Moon did, purifying the bloodlines and the sex cult kind of thing that he started when he first started the Moonies. And he interviewed this guy, and the guy had the pictures, and he talked about his wives and this wife that wasn't, and his illegitimate children. And this was back before Stephen had like a good recorder or anything. So he's just kind of in this guy's hotel room, and it's in Japan, and this guy's just going through these photos and stuff. And it's a fascinating interview, but Stephen doesn't even really talk about that. And listening to him here talk where he's like, well, and I don't know. I mean, Stephen mentioned he's coming up on his 50th anniversary, and it's just shocking to me. Because he just, and again, I think it's because of that. He had altruistic motives in the beginning, and then it became a for-profit grift where the details don't matter. Really talking about the subject matter about the Moonies, about, the cult, the dangers of it, that it's still recruiting on college campuses. It becomes more about his story. Go to freedomofmind.com. Why am I not being interviewed by, these major networks anymore? why don't people want to hear from me? I wrote this cult of book, this book about Trump, the cult of Trump. It's very, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Cult, where he took a lot of the doctrine from, and I have a video with a Japanese Christian friend of mine and colleague who helps get people out of cults like the Moonies, who actually went to Korea and I have a video of him showing pictures of the actual history.
Speaking of what the devil, past. So to speak, what I was talking about. But it was a
small know-nothing cult.
Regarding the interview I did with Pascal ZV approximately 14 years ago, what can I say? Pascal is a person that I have great respect for, a man of integrity. He is a Frenchman who went to Japan to study judo, fell in love with a Japanese woman, got married, converted to Christianity, and got very, very interested and involved in counseling people out of the Moonies and other sects in Japan. And so when my book first came out in Japanese, I was brought over by the publisher and did 1 billion interviews, and the term mind control was introduced to Japanese culture. This was way before the spiritual sales scam came of light. This was before the Om Shinrikyo sarin gassing took place. And I believe it was my second trip back to Japan for 60 minutes for the Om Shinrikyo sarin gas cult story that Pascal said. I just came back from Korea and I found out all this information. And I basically had a camera that I had with me, which apparently I didn't take off the dating code. It was a brand new camera, and I just said, would you mind if I tape this, because people that I counsel coming out of the Moonies will probably want to hear this. And he graciously allowed me to do that. So I would refer you back to Pascal if you have any specific questions about that. I can tell you when he was explaining the history, it just made total sense to me that, if the theology of the UC was that Satan seduced Eve sexually and she seduced Adam, and then the reverse was that true Adam had to sexually seduce Eve and purify her, and that of course morphed into purifying lots of female wombs, made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense that he was in a cult himself and that he stole out of the theology. And then, in fact, many other people made huge contributions to the whole belief system. So that's some of my recollections of that. Okay, so we're here in Tokyo with Pascal. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Pascal Zivi. I'm French. I come now 16 years ago to Japan to study judo, and 10 years ago I started to be interested in cult problem, and in particular with the Moon Church problem. And 6 years ago I had a chance to read a book of Mr. Steve Hassan about the mind control, and I started to study also from this time the problem of the mind control. I don't know exactly how many young people I meet in the Moon Church. I have a chance to discuss with them, but I think 250 people I have a chance to meet. And 2 years ago I have a very big chance now. I meet a man called Mr. Park Chung-fang and his friend Mr. Yu Yo-min and also Mr. Kim Tok-ching. They was the first people start the Moon Church in 1944 with Mr. Moon, and for many reasons, they left the church now, and they give to me a lot very interesting information about the beginning of the church, and I'm sure the American people and the American Moonists didn't know about this, and even in Japan, only very few people know about what these people tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And first,
he wrote a book too, correct?
What?
Mr. Park Chung-sang?
Yes, Mr. Park Chung-sang wrote a book, the book was just translated only in Japanese, and the name of the book in Japanese first is Roku Maria no Higeki. Higeki in English means tragedy, Roku means six, and Maria means like in the mother of Jesus Christ, Maria. And if you translate all in English, you can be the tragedy of the sixth Maria. And when I meet Mr. Park Chung-sang, he gave to me a lot information, very old book and very old picture,
Until the founder of the Korean CIA decided that they would be a good proxy group for them to use to brainwash South Koreans.
It wasn't really a no-non cult.
To counter
Just
North
listen to my
Korean
beginning episodes if you want to know more.
So you're saying the foundings of the Moonies, of the Unification Church, was a partnership between Sun Myung Moon and the South Korean government?
So he started the cult. He was an ex-cult member of this other cult that he stole a lot of the doctrines from. But it was really, the Moonies would never become a thing without very intentional political intelligence, intentions, and money.
So he started the church in Korea?
He started it in Korea, and I don't think it was taken over or guided by the Korean CIA till 61 or 2 or 3, early 60s. So he founded it in 54, presumably.
Okay. And so he starts it, and then
he had a lot of sex with a lot of girls. There were newspaper articles.
Tragedy of the Six Marys, Stephen.
He was
he raped
not
them.
a good
a lot of them.
Christian at all.
Did he?
He wasn't just having sex with them. A lot of them were coerced.
Did he claim
I don't know. I think so.
You don't know.
I mean, I think he did, but I don't know that he was telling people overtly that he was the Messiah and Jesus.
Was he just like a pastor?
He didn't have any theology training. I think he did a year as an electrical engineer at Waseda University in Japan.
That's a lie. Now, this is from How Well Do You Know Your Moon? And it is the Tumblr I've just talked about before. And this is really good because, like Stephen Hassan, even though he's a cult expert and knows everything he should be the foremost expert on, Sun Myung Moon, even he got this wrong. And the Tumblr is really good because a lot of people have weighed in on these issues and have covered this. So I wanted to go over this a little bit and read the facts about Moon not having a degree or even having the schooling of this 1 year. So it starts off, Sun Myung Moon's fake Waseda University graduation certificate. Moon attended evening classes 6 to 9:30 p.m. at Technical High School associated with Waseda University. He never went to any university or seminary anywhere. Michael Brown confirmed the high school details in his book Sun Myung Moon, The Early Years, 1920 to 1953 on page 48, 58, and 170. Moon was in Japan from April 1st, 1941 to just after he graduated from the high school on September 30th of 1943. That was a total of 30 months in Japan. And then they showed the cover, the fake certificate. The certificate looks fake, and it is false. Under Moon's Japanese name, his birthday is January 6, 1920, the 9th year of Teshio. This document says that Moon graduated on September 30th, 1943, the 18th year of Showa. However, Michael Brown in his book Sun Myung Moon, The Early Years on page 59 gives Moon's graduation date from high school as September 18th. The certificate was made on October 18, 1977, the 52nd year of Showa. The stamp at the top seems to have been added later. At the bottom, there is no signature. The name printed is Mr. Murai Sanuka, a Waseda University vice president who was opposed to Moon. Mr. Murai created an organization to fight against CARP and the Unification Church. Mr. Murai gave an interview to the UC to a Japanese magazine, and I'll provide the link in my sourcing. The fake certificate was used in several Japanese publications, including this book, and they'll show the cover here, Walking to the Sanctuary, Holy Place. This book was published by the Japanese Unification Church on October 2nd of 2000. Behind Moon is one of the main Waseda University buildings, which he probably never even entered. The fake certificate is on page 26. The UC book was published 26 years after the fraud had been revealed by Machiya newspaper and 25 years after Mr. Hiroshi Yamaguchi's 1975 book included a detailed expose of Moon's Waseda fraud. Then in the Manichi newspaper company cleared it up, and a newspaper reporter examined the issue. Moreover, I checked through the student services at Waseda University, and it turned out that they couldn't find either of the names Moon Young Myung, Rumi Bun, or Ramya Imoto, or Sun Myung Moon. I apologize greatly to anybody I offended. I'm not very good with the Japanese language or pronunciations. So that is the truth behind Moon's false certificates at Waseda University or any connections to them.
So how is he a religious leader?
It was there's a false document saying that he got a degree there.
There's a lot of cult leaders who just create a story about their past. And his story is when he was 16, Jesus appeared to him and said that he had to fulfill his unfinished mission.
So he claimed to be visited by Jesus at age 16? Does that sound familiar, Samantha?
Did he claim that at 16 or retroactively?
Retroactively.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, there are people who are now deceased, but who were there at the beginning, who've written about it. But most of that material is still in Korean or Japanese and not translated.
So after he gains a religious following,
can find it.
He claims that previously Jesus visited him and said what?
You have to have the will to look and find it and share it with others.
I need you to fulfill my unfinished mission. You are the Lord of the Second Advent. And not only Jesus, but Buddha, Muhammad, everybody, former presidents of the U.S. are all bowing before Moon is what members believe.
And he had a problematic sexual history.
Oh, yeah. He left his wife, and he was partying with lots of college students, apparently.
He wasn't partying with them, Stephen.
And the hypocrisy of cult leaders is legendary, I might add, having studied the whole subject. But so I want to just mention, forgive me, but I'm going to go to 1976. When I got out of the Moonies, I was a very high-ranking person with access to all these internal documents.
Voted up pretty fast. I never had any power. I was given, title.
And I was approached by this congressional subcommittee looking into the Korean CIA.
I've read this whole thing.
And I said, I will tell you anything you want to know, but I'm afraid they're going to murder me. So can we, not make it public that I am giving you all my documents and that I'm answering all your questions? They said, sure. And it was only after Jonestown happened, because I naively thought the government was going to expose this cult and shut them down because they were involved with so many illegal, improper things, so many that I knew of. Then after Jonestown and Leo Ryan was assassinated, 900 people were murdered at the hands of Jim Jones. I was called to Washington to testify. Senator Dole asked me to come and testify. I get down to D.C., and the Moonies are protesting, and I'm taken off the agenda along with a former People's Temple member. And I went, what the hell's going on here? The Moonies were put up to speak at a counter-cult thing. And that's when I decided I would read the entire investigation. There were 11 volumes of transcripts of this investigation. That's where I read the founder of the Korean CIA, who was under oath, saying, I organized and utilized the Unification Church for use as a political tool.
Sure.
And it opened up my eyes.
That's not exactly what it says, but the KCI
of how psychology has been undergoing
did utilize, and there was a working relationship between both of them.
Speedily figure out how to manipulate and brainwash people en masse.
The same as it worked in the United States with the
You
Moonies.
know, I had my first
political
really,
power, militaries,
eye-opening,
money.
shocking moment just as you tell your story, because Joseph Smith, somewhere between 14 and 16, claims later, 10, 15 years later, that at that same age,
You
he was
scratch my
visited by
back, I'll
God and
scratch
Jesus.
yours.
And he had a problematic sexual history. So for me, and I'm sure for you, Samantha, big bells went off, right?
Yeah. But they all do that.
I mean, that's common, right?
Yeah, it's common enough to not be surprising.
Yeah, but that's very familiar.
So, but understand that a lot of copycatism happens with cult leaders, where because I think Smith was way earlier than Moon was even born. So the likelihood is that if Smith said that in the 1800s, that Moon copied him as opposed to the other way around.
Well, of course.
Yeah,
he died
of course.
in 1844. Yeah.
And I should also add
Yeah,
that
Stephen.
I was in leadership meetings where these very big shot people, I didn't know their names, but I knew on at least 2-3 occasions there were Mormon higher ups that were meeting with Moon. This is 74 to 76.
Yeah, we often wonder how much lawyers and accountants and leaders
Money and greed
of the LDS Church meet with Scientology leaders, Jehovah's Witness leaders, because they all share similar experiences of like hiding abuse, of hiding their financial position, of marketing, in a culture that's inhospitable.
And wanting to stop the ex-members and the movement to expose brainwashing and mind control.
And protecting what they call religious freedom. Right?
Yeah, well, that's their rap. But,
so they collaborate.
So the Moonies would back a lot of Mormon politicians. Orrin Hatch was someone that the Moonies adored.
Oh, and
they
Orrin
worked
loved
very
them.
closely together, to name one person.
Ooh, that's a little gross.
I don't know if I'm not supposed to talk about politics, but there's a lot of dirty dealing happening with elitist billionaires who think that there's, and they're malignant narcissists. I should say that too. They don't have empathy, and they don't care. They look at people as objects for their use.
Yeah. Well, this is so fascinating. Let's try to circle back to your story now.
Okay.
So you. And then I guess we didn't finish with Reverend Moon. So at some point he moved to the
I hate
U.S.
when people call him a reverend.
Okay.
He never went to seminary. He paid a few tens of thousands of dollars to get an honorary degree.
Okay.
But he's not a reverend. I was a reverend.
Yeah.
He said, "We're reverends now." I was Reverend Stephen Hassan. It's like, okay, it's like Scientology. We're all religions. We're in a religion now.
So at some point, I guess he moved to the U.S. Is that right?
Yes, he first came in 65, and I have some speeches, some copies of transcripts of speeches that were recorded and then printed up by the cult.
Did he ever speak English?
Is very interesting because as a leader, I had access to all these documents. They're called Master Speaks. And I have very early 70s before I got recruited where he's saying, I'm busily studying English. That's the one thing that's going to help solve the, speed up the restoration. And his English sucked. Even, throughout his life, he could barely articulate words. And he always tried to promote a vision of him being superior at anything he did. And he couldn't drive a car because he would have to speed and beat everybody wherever this is one of the stories that members were told.
Big stretch.
But most of the time when I was in leadership meetings, it was clear he was hearing English and understanding it, but he would speak in Korean and someone would translate. And sometimes he would say one thing and what got translated, it was obvious by body language that it was not the same thing.
One other quick parallel, the Mormon Church considers itself a restorationist church. So we talk about the restoration all the time. And what we mean is, like you said, Jesus's work fell into what's called apostasy, and Joseph Smith was needed to restore Jesus's true church and then to finish the job. So in that sense, it's another very important parallel between the Moonies and the Mormons.
Yeah, I really want to learn more about Mormonism. So I'm very interested to learn anything you want to share.
Well, we're sharing some parallels.
Yeah, no, this is really valuable. I if I may just say quickly
Mormon.
that
the hotel we stayed at
entered my professional
Summer, I don't know where I
career
put it.
about the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints.
I wanted to read it too.
I was asked to talk to a couple of girls about that. I know you don't want to talk about that, so I will.
We'll get there.
I'll leave it for later. Entity at my former college where I would recruit students to drop out of college and join the Messianic movement.
Wow.
I'm still curious what happened at your, well, maybe not second thing, after the weekend where you had decided that you wanted to go back just out of curiosity to learn more. What was that the meeting or the day when there was a switch where it crossed over in your brain from just being curiosity to being converted, or what was that transition?
Honeybook. Good question. What I remember is them making explicit appeals that you just really need to do your due diligence, Steve, and learn more so you know what you're getting involved with, and if you don't like it, you can leave. So it was absolutely the opposite of we're asking you to commit your life forever to this organization. They didn't say at that early point, we want you to drop out of college, or we want you to cut off contact with your family and friends because they're possessed by Satan. There was none of that. It was an appeal to why don't you take the time to understand the divine principle and really study it up? And I said, so who is the Messiah? We can't tell you. You need to pray about it and study more.
So they're withholding information from you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. But again, I love to learn. I'm a curious person, and they're like, you need to figure this out, Steve, who the Messiah is. We can't tell you. So that was kind of the lure, Samantha, okay, so I skipped a year. I was going to graduate college a year early. I have time. I'm going to just spend another weekend to learn more. But by the end of that weekend, I was gone.
You figured it out who the Messiah was?
No, but I was like, my memory is hazy about the specifics. I remember them saying, they used the 40-day condition. They like to do numbers, and they said, Jesus fasted for 40 days. Moses fasted for 40 days to receive the 10 commandments. We think you should do a 40-day condition to not interact with your family or friends and just study the divine principle. That was the 40 days where I immersed myself into reading their scripture.
They have scripture?
They have a book called The Divine Principle,
okay, yeah.
hardcover, black with gold lettering.
Does it give you the answer to who the Messiah is?
All the Divine Principle books aren't black. There's different colors for different publications.
But it leads you
Depends
to
on what
the
version you have.
that there could be no one else.
His might be the
But
black
later,
one.
as a leader,
I think it's the one he pulls out all the time.
I realize that the divine principle is different in different countries. Like the Japanese culturally don't like the Koreans. They look down on the Koreans, and they're one of the biggest strongholds of Mooney money is Japan, and we can talk about what's happening after the assassination of Abe. But they definitely didn't want to talk about Korea being, the chosen nation or anything like that. In Korea, yeah, not at all.
What was your level of conversion at the start of the 40 days? How much of you was still thinking this was just an intellectual experiment?
My recollection was that was my frame, that I'll take time out from school and my family to study more. It was not like a formal baptism and I never went to a 7-day workshop, which was extraordinary. People went to a 3-day, 7-day, 21-day, 40, and then if you were a leader, 120-day training. I did 2-3 days, and the rest was individual grooming by the top leadership.
So you went into the 40 days thinking maybe this is legitimate and sort of the thing, but then by the end of the 40 days, fully converted.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was towards the end of that they asked me to they told me the Abraham being asked to kill his son Isaac story as an example of his true faith, and they asked me what my Isaac was, and I said, I don't know, and they said, we think your poetry is. Do you love God enough to sacrifice the thing you love the most? And I said, yes. And they said, well, go get your poetry. Throw it in that garbage can. And I lost like 400 poems. And years of my writing that I never got back.
Psychological.
I've been looking for a place of where to put this in because it's kind of weird and awkward, and there's no real good place to kind of drop it in. So I figured this was the best place to put it because he talks about having to give up his poetry. So he does have this in combating cults and mind control. I always end up leaving out the cult part. I just always call it combating mind control. Don't mean to do that, but the correct title is combating cults and mind control. But within the book and even the updated, he does have one part that he has in the books, in that book, but he does not talk about it anywhere else. And I found it so striking and odd. So I'm just going to read that quickly. And he mentions it in 2 different parts. If so, let me back up here. Is there a God? If so, why does he allow so much suffering? What role am I to play in the world eventually? Can I do anything to make a difference? At that time, I felt extreme pressure to make a big contribution to humankind. I had been told all my life how intelligent I was and how much I would accomplish when I grew up. I'm going to graduate in another year, and time was running out. I had already become a, quote, foster parent of a little girl in Chile to whom I sent money each month. I had decided that writing was probably my most important pursuit, and so I wrote. Still, I felt it wasn't enough. I looked out into the world and saw so much in the way of social injustice, political corruption, and ecological problems that it seemed I could offer little. I knew that I wanted to, and then I ended that little part because the important part was the, quote, foster parent of a little girl in Chile. And then we go on to the next part of whatever the Moonies make him give up things. I donated my bank account to the center and would have given my car, except that my parents had the title. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of this, but it's just such an odd detail to put in. I had to abandon my Chilean foster child. Now, this time foster child is not in quotes. So that leads you to believe that this is not a quote unquote foster child. I had to abandon my Chilean foster child because I had no way to earn money to send her. I was asked to sacrifice my, quote, Isaac, a term used by the Moonies for something the members hold very dear. In my case, it was my poetry. I threw out everything I had written, some 400 pieces. Now, I think Stephen knows that this is an odd thing to put in there, abandoning his Chilean foster child, and that people would probably have a few questions about that. Now, if anybody's familiar or if you remember, and it's kind of like they play a lot of times, and you'll see them if you stay up late at night. I think they still do them. They had in the 80s, 90s, you would see those commercials for UNICEF. I think one was called Child Fund, where you could adopt a child for 25 cents a day, 50 cents a day, things like that. And you would kind of get a generic card in the mail when it first happened. And I think some of them did write back to you eventually. But that's, I think, what Stephen did. I'm just making some assumptions here. I don't know. But he makes it seem like it's this very real personal connection type thing that he had, that this was actually, he was a foster parent to this little Chilean girl. And it was so moving to him that he put it in the book, or he wanted to make it a bigger part of his story. I don't know. That part really just struck me when I first read it. And again, I really pay attention to details. It's just something that I've always done, reading, writing, getting, the criminological degree, like paying attention to the way people write, why they do what they do, the way they talk, they speak, their actions. And, yeah, picking up on that, like I had already become a quote foster parent of a little girl in Chile. And then when he says he had to abandon his Chilean foster child, like if you're reading this really quick, his book, and you're looking for answers, you've lost a family member or something, like you're not going to pick up like, wait a second, did he ever reconnect with the Chilean foster child when he got out? What happened to that relationship? Like it's very odd detail, very odd indeed. Jumping in here because I messed up the title of his book again. It's Combating Cult Mind Control. That's the exact title. I honestly cannot believe I have to come in and put this in here, but I could not, in good conscience, leave it out after I found it. I was in the middle of doing final editing, and I was looking for one more piece of information I needed regarding Stephen Hassan and cults and things of that nature. And I was on newspaper archives, and I was reading some articles, and I came across an article in the transcript dated Friday, February 27th, 1987, and the title is Cults Hypnotize, Control, Ex Mooney Warns. And within this, there is a quote from Dr. Stephen Hassan. It's a very youthful picture of him, too. But above that, I'll read the beginning and then read his quote. Mr. Hassan actually left his first Mooney workshop after 3 days, but he returned later to find out more. Quote, within 3 months, I quit school, quit work, turned over my bank account to them, abandoned my foster parent relationship with a girl in Peru, cut my hair and put on a suit and tie, and was out proselytizing for the group. So now it's not a Chilean foster child. We have now moved into Peru.
Psychologically, what's that mechanism of what does that do for them to ask you to sacrifice something important to you? Why is that important?
Well, so on multiple levels, but if you can get someone to do an extreme behavior, there's a very powerful cognitive dissonance force to rationalize it and justify it and feel good about it. And they wanted to kill my pre-Mooney self. Like everything got redefined as my satanic origin. And I came to later be told that the Holocaust was necessary because the Jews didn't accept Jesus. The exact opposite of my entire childhood values and beliefs. But part of the indoctrination is to create a pseudo identity in the image of the leader or the ideal member. So I was taught to think like Moon and feel like Moon and walk like Moon and talk like Moon. And I was led to believe that Milton and Estelle were my physical parents, but Moon and his wife were my true parents. There was a lot of parental and being a good child of God. So regression to childhood appeals in the indoctrination of the cult. But what I want to say is that the projection that one has, if you are told this is the Lord of love, who's the most perfect being on earth, I can generate, and I did generate a lot of projection of how great this person was, as opposed to this is another billionaire business person who's overweight and is arrogant. But I mean, I was later in these leadership meetings where I could like see he had wax in his ears and he hadn't cleaned them, or he had BO, or he did a fart and he didn't say excuse me to anyone because like we were nothing and he was
like a child.
Messiah.
He did a fart.
But a lot of things get suppressed because you're in this new identity and you're taught any negative thought is Satan or evil spirits invading you. In fact, in 1974, the New York membership were taken to Greenwich Village. They had rented an entire movie theater to watch the Exorcist movie. And then we all went up in vans to Tarrytown, and Moon gave a speech how God
threats, and I suppose after a period of time they don't know much of a world outside the cult, at least as adults, in some cases.
Yeah, the wiring was, I mean, I was out of the Moonies for 4 years before I made the connection cognitively of having been shown the Exorcist movie in 1974 with 300 other Moonies, and then Moon saying, God made this movie's a prophecy of what will happen to you if you leave the Unification Church. I was out of the group for 4 years, and then as I was studying phobias, I went, oh, that's where, that was the point where I started distrusting my own ability to think, and every time I had a doubt, it was an evil spirit trying to invade me.
Well, there can be a period of time where, this is in keeping with what you just said, when the fear of one's doubts taking over is so great that the greater the doubt, the more extreme one's effort to cover it over, and the more extreme one's new plunge into the totalistic environment may be. That occurred with people undergoing Chinese thought reform.
Right. So I want to express my gratitude.
Here's the story. So I'm in the frickin' Moonies, if I may curse, because I've watched.
I don't think you said frickin' is not a curse.
Okay, good.
I don't think you said a curse.
Okay,
If I may curse, frickin'.
The Exorcist movie comes out.
Oh,
Moon buses
boy.
300 members, including myself, into Greenwich Village to watch
Usually
The
summer child
Exorcist.
season.
Party.
Watch the movie. We all get in our vans, go to Tarrytown to the palatial estate, and
They have a
Moon-
palatial estate?
They had multiple ones. This one particular one at Tarrytown is where I got a lot of my indoctrination. It used to be owned by the Seagrams family. Moon gets up and he says, God made The Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen if people leave the Unification Church. Okay. Now,
I've heard
before
Moon
he
speak. That's not
before he
what he
gave
sounds
that
like.
speech, we were singing holy songs for 3 hours. That's after watching this crazy Exorcist movie, and I only remembered the Exorcist movie 4 years after I got out of the cult, and I was studying psychology, and we were learning about phobias, and I was thinking back. So how was I installed with phobias? And then I remembered this movie and this lecture, and it's like, holy crap, I believed it 100%. Satan was everywhere, and only by being in God's holy family. Yep, that's it. And the head zips around and levitates.
Great movie. A lot of fun.
It scared the
Exorcist 2
bejeebers.
sucked, though.
And anyway,
You just rifle off for me a bunch of parallels that I just, when I interview ex-cult members, I like to draw attention to.
Sure.
So like, hero worship, check for Mormonism, whether it's Joseph Smith or the current prophet.
Yep.
They speak to and for God, and they're next to God or Jesus in righteousness. There's even accounts of Joseph Smith boasting to be superior to Jesus in some ways. So that
Moon did that too, by the way.
No,
and,
I know.
And superior to God at some speeches.
So there's parallels there for me. There's definitely parallels of, probably the most famous Mormon childhood song is "I Am a Child of God," and I think we all have such a positive association with that song growing up that because it's with our childhood, and there's a loving Heavenly Father, and who doesn't, and a loving Heavenly Mother, and who doesn't love that? But what I'm just now realizing is there's a psychological purpose of a song like that, because it basically says, Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother are more important than your own parents.
Yep.
And then, and that's a fact. I don't think there's any Mormon that's going to disagree that if you have to choose between Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother and your own parents, you choose Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. But the rub is that who is it that tells you what Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother want for you? It's the church leaders. So in that way, there's some soft parental alienation that isn't quite as hard as maybe Scientology or the Moonies. But for me, it's there. Samantha, does that ring true for you or not?
Yeah, and also in a way infantilization, because I didn't grow up with the song "I Am a Child of God," but songs like that being introduced to my psyche, they do take you back to those younger versions of yourself where, it's appropriate for you to be codependent and kind of sort of prime you for just that, more childlike state where you feel like you need to look to these perfect parent figures.
So you also reminded me that so much of the Mooney experience was singing holy songs. Mm-hmm. There was a whole booklet of holy songs, and so we would do pledge service on Sunday.
If you watch the back episodes of this podcast, you can see, I believe it's in the Tragedy of the Six Marys part, where there is a gentleman that now he has left Moonies, but he was an early member of the church, and he wrote a majority of Moon's songs.
Sunday at 5:30 and bow to an altar with Moon's picture on it and recite a pledge to fight for our life for God and the fatherland, which was Korea, etc. But whenever we would, go and hear Moon speak or any of the leaders, we would be singing holy songs for 2-3 hours before they would appear, just to warm up the environment. And this is an yet to be really researched and documented area of cult mind control, is the use of music.
Yeah.
Because it affects our brain and emotional level deeply.
100%.
So like one of the songs is Heavenly Soldiers.
Yeah.
In the Moonies, but a lot of things about being a child. And if you think developmentally, if you wanna control a person, reduce them to childhood and be their parental substitute, then they're gonna be
really
easy
quickly,
to apply it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Really quick, just to note a couple other things.
Sure.
This idea that negative thoughts are satanic, super Mormon, right?
Oh, very, yeah.
Yeah, like in Mormonism, contention is of the devil. And anytime you feel yucky, that's the Holy Ghost telling you to run away. But once you've been conditioned into Mormonism, of course, anything against Mormonism is going to make you feel yucky. So you're always primed to run away from anything that would.
Yeah, and you're taught to do thought stopping or emotion blocking because you want to stay pure. Yeah. You want to stay aligned with your mission and God's spirit.
And then the Exorcist story reminds me of fear and conditioning through fear. And with music, that the bite model, E is emotion, fear is one emotion.
It's the biggest universal mind control technique, is what I call phobia indoctrination.
And with Mormonism, it's that you won't be with your children or your parents or your siblings in the afterlife, right? So it's fear of not making it to the highest degree of the celestial kingdom with all your family. So that's the dark side of fear-based emotional manipulation. There's positive emotion that we're manipulated with as well. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir is one of the world's most famous choirs.
Right.
We all sing from a very young age, primary songs that indoctrinate us. And, we're conditioned to sing in choirs and to love music, and that music evokes positive emotion, which then we're taught that whenever you feel positive emotion, that means the church is true.
Yep.
Samantha, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Sorry, this is a separate point, but I also think it's interesting. You're not Korean, but the Moonies had you putting Korea on this pedestal as, the most important country. And I'm not American, but I'm being conditioned to put America on this pedestal. Not so much while as a Mormon in England, but cults can even get you to embrace nationalism for a country that isn't yours.
Nationalism,
good point.
Which you would think you would have something in your brain being like, that random country is probably not the best country in the whole world.
Yeah, nationalism of the founder.
Trump
and if you read
even
the Mormon
and
scriptures, Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about the Constitution and how God prepared the United States to be the place where the true church would be restored. And that's a fantastic parallel. Samantha, the nationalism.
Good point, Samantha.
Yeah, and then pledges like Mormons recite. There's the Young Women's Pledge that young women's recite every week, right? Men have pledges. Missionaries have pledges, and so I don't mean to be doing parallelism to sort of reinforce my own biases, but I am hearing a lot of parallels.
I mean, is it a bias or is it just noticing relevant parallels?
Yeah, I agree with Samantha on that one. It's not a bias to say 2 + 2 = 4. It's not 5. It's not 3.
Yeah.
And, there are these formulaic, destructive authoritarian cult practices. And that's part of the power of I know we're going to talk about my work later, but to see it in another group allows one a perspective on one's own experience that where you can see it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's just take a second to introduce the BITE model. We've talked about it before. B stands for behavior, I stands for information and the control of it. T stands for thoughts.
Right.
And E stands for emotions, control of thoughts and manipulation through emotion.
Break it down.
What were like Mormonism is like, don't drink coffee, don't drink tea, don't drink alcohol, stay sexually pure, no masturbation, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I never masturbated one time in 2.5 years.
So what were
Not a single time.
What were the big behavioral no-nos?
I had 2 nocturnal emissions, and I had to fast for 3 days and take a cold shower till I turned purple. Sorry, I had to just.
No, that's great. What were the big behavioral no-nos within the Moonies? The way they controlled you with behavior.
No, that's great. No, that's great. That's great, Stephen. You didn't masturbate for 2. The way John Delon was just like, no, that's great. Yeah, Stephen, moving along. Like, this is where I say if you pay attention when Dr. Stephen Hassan talks and his interviews and stuff, he has a childlike aspect to the way he uses language, and he is very focused on sexual aspects of things. And the Moonies did do, and cults do these things. It's just the way that he presents it and throws it out there in the most inopportune times that it doesn't really fit the flow of the conversation. Let's replay Dr. Stephen Hassan talking about breaking it inappropriately about masturbation, in my opinion, where it wasn't asked or, the context he provided and maybe questionable, and he just throws it out there.
If you don't drink tea, don't drink alcohol, stay sexually pure, no masturbation, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I never masturbated one time in 2.5 years.
So what were the
not a single time.
What were the big behavioral no-nos?
I had 2 nocturnal emissions, and I had to fast for 3 days and take a cold shower till I turned purple. Sorry, I had to just.
No, that's great. What were the big behavioral no-nos within the Moonies? The way they controlled you with behavior? Was it dress?
Well, first of all, a universal mind control thing is sleep manipulation and deprivation. So as a good Moonie, we were told Father only sleeps 3 to 4 hours a night. I was trained to be like Father, therefore I would sleep 3 to 4 hours a night. So I was sleep deprived, and we know for sure through neuroscience that you're not using your your frontal cortex when you're sleep deprived. Yeah. You just are not able to think clearly.
You get dumber.
Keep that in mind when June Stewartson shows his screenshots of how little he sleeps and how much hours he spends online.
There were a few exceptions where I got very sick and I slept for a week. I had tonsillectomy. I slept for a week through that. But other than that, I was chronically sleep deprived. There was rigid rules of where you slept, what you ate, how you dressed.
What were you not supposed to eat? What were you not supposed to eat? Or what were you supposed to eat? Do you remember?
It's a good question. Mostly in the Moonies, the leaders got very fancy restaurant food, and often the Moonies got McDonald's or rice dishes.
McDonald's,
I went to eat sushi in the Moonies, and the Moonies are very big in the fishing industry. A lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Is that part of the doctrine or the theology?
No, I don't think it was a doctrinal thing. It was more like we need to save money.
Frugality.
But in the meantime, Moon has Lincoln Continental stretch limousines and yachts and mansions, multi-million-dollar mansions, and we're sleeping on sleeping bags on the floor, freezing cold. But for me, you always had, this is an important part of the doctrine, which I forgot to mention. So in the Mooney theology, because Cain killed Abel, and Abel was the preferred child of God, all of the restoration had to be that Cain had to submit to Abel. And so in the Moonies, all relationships were described as Cain-Abel relationships or chapter 2 relationships. Cain-Abel were authority-subordinate issues, like you always had to obey your leader, even if he told you something stupid. for something that was wrong to do, you were expected to follow blindly. I'll give you a quick example of that. I was put on a mobile fundraising team as part of breaking a person's ego to be on the street selling chocolates or candies or candles. And I was put under someone who was a new captain on a van, and he dropped me off to go into a bar at like 3 p.m. And I said, there's nobody in the bar this time of day. Why don't you drop me off at the stoplight?
Now, this story here, you are not going to get in Stephen Hassan's interviews that he does or books that he writes. It's very few and far between where you can find little tidbits of Dr. Stephen Hassan's and stories that he tells. This one was interesting.
Because I can make a lot more money. That was reported back to the superior, who yelled at me because I was faithless. How did I know if I went in that I wouldn't have gotten a $100 donation from a single person? That I needed to just blindly obey. So that was inculcated over and over again. I lost my train of thought.
No, in Mormon, why were you nodding your head, Samantha?
Just the follow the leader, even if he's wrong.
Oh yeah, so Cain, Abel, so everything was like submission to whoever was designated as your authority figure, even if they didn't know what they were talking about. And the other is a chapter 2 problem, which is in the divine principle, is the fall of man, that you having lust. So in my experience in the Moonies, I was never allowed to be in a room alone with a woman because she might rape me or seduce me. And like, I have 2 older sisters. I grew up with women. I loved sex. But this was
there
like,
he goes again.
no, man is subject, woman is object. Man gives love, woman gives beauty. And this whole very patriarchal, thing going on. But I want to mention those 2 concepts and just link it to loaded language, because thought control, if you can reduce the complexity of human interaction into these labels or into these boxes, it's easy to manipulate and control people's identities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So strong sexual controls?
There was no sex. And I couldn't hug a woman, a friend, or whatever.
Without marriage?
Yeah, and even if you were married, you had to get permission to kiss your wife or have marital relations. There were strict positions. They were not for oral sex. They were not for women on top. Missionary position, etc. Again, I got out before I was married, so this is not something I have direct experience about.
Yeah, so Mormonism forbade oral sex until there was a revolt in the church, but masturbation to this day is forbidden.
Yeah.
And premarital sex is forbidden. Samantha, did you want to add something?
Were you saying that you couldn't hug men either? Or
no, you could hug men.
You could hug men a
bit. You could hug men.
So you had some physical touch.
So I had some, but was very rare. But I want to just tell you a story of my friend Alan Wood, who was a top leader, who left just before I joined.
Alan Tate Wood does testify before the Congressional Committee that Stephen Hassan talks about all the time, and I think I talk about them a little bit background, but they do testify, and you can find their congressional testimony, which I've linked in the sourcing and things, but they actually did go and testify. Excuse me, they actually did go testify for that hearing that was held back in the 70s. So they were a top leader. I forget the exact branch of the Moonies they worked for, but yeah, Alan Tate Wood, that's who he's talking about.
Because he said they were making people into Nazis, Steve, like you. And Alan tells a story of being with Moon where he says, and he was the head of the political arm of the Moonies in the U.S. He said, Father, what do we do about homosexuals? How do we help these people? And Moon's response was, tell them if it becomes a problem to cut it off, barbecue it, put it in a shoebox, and send it to me.
Holy moly.
Stephen, would you like to talk about your friend J.K. Rowling?
Alan said when he heard that, he knew he needed to leave the cult.
So let's move on to one of the most incendiary stories where you as a leader asked Moon a question about gay people in
Yes.
a church. Tell us that story, please.
Yeah, it's July 1973, and it was a monthly meeting at his house in Tarrytown, and there were state leaders and One World Crusade commanders from all 50 states, plus European leaders, Asian leaders, were all together in this carriage house, which has been kind of refitted to be a place where presentations are given.
Oh yeah, I was indoctrinated there many times.
There we were with Mr. Moon on stage, and he had been talking to us for, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. And at the very end, he said, "Are there any general questions?" And I stood up, the One World Crusade commander from Maryland. I stood up and I said, "Yes, Father, I'd like to ask you what we can do in our movement to help the men who have the problem of homosexuality." And he stopped cold in his tracks, got very still, and then he stepped forward and he said in that dramatic fashion, where he's waving his fists in his hands, and he said, "You tell them if it really becomes a problem to cut it off, barbecue it, put it in a shoebox, and send it to me." The whole room was silent, just like, what's going to happen now? And then he stepped forward and he began to laugh. And then the whole room sort of exploded into laughter, all just up and down, up and down, up and down. And I was sitting there thinking, my dad wasn't perfect, but he was a good man and he was a psychiatrist. And what he taught me was that the appropriate response to human suffering is compassion and love. And here's this guy who I'd been thinking was the Messiah, who's going to straighten out all the problems in human history. And he treats this serious issue as essentially as a dirty joke and as something to laugh at. And at that moment, in late 1973, it's like, that was like a big crack in my belief in and my devotion to him. It's like I began to understand something's wrong here. This is not right.
Yep. It's very homophobic cult, and they would do conversion things and abstinence pledges, go around in schools to tell people never to have premarital sex. And
so yeah, sexual control,
very homophobic.
Homophobia, check.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
well, it's not okay, but you're saying, yeah, check.
I'm saying check. We have those in common.
Yes.
We never have a leader. I guess we never had leaders explicitly tell gay men to cut off their penises, right?
I suppose not. But there were things like, was it Boyd K. Packer who essentially endorsed a missionary companion punching his companion for finding out he's gay?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Right. Yeah, and I want to someday have a conversation with you just about the parallels and the differences, but there's so many parallels. Mormonism takes a bit of a softer approach with the same mindset, just a bit of a softer hand, which I think allows it to be more wealthy and powerful and successful.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many parallels, but it's always with a tiny bit of a softer edge. And you're saying no.
Yeah, but I mean, if you go back to Joseph Smith or Brigham's time, or that kind of polygamy times, at least it wasn't as soft as it is today.
No, Brigham Young would say if you catch if a black man and a woman are having sex, like
blood atonement,
javelin through the heart is their only atonement. Kind of weird thing.
Yeah, murder is merciful if someone's been sinful.
Yeah, so
we talk about Mormonism being, because it has had to become softer because it's wanted to be so mainstream, but like the majority of the existence of Mormonism hasn't really been like that.
Has been in some ways as horrific as Reverend Moon or Leader Moon. What do I call him?
Mr. Moon.
Mr. Moon.
Is my preferred term.
Yeah.
I'm triggering Steve when I say Reverend.
No, you don't trigger me. It's just it gives him a credibility he never earned, and
language
he
is
doesn't
powerful,
deserve. Yeah, and cult propagandists want to promote it as a legitimate religion, and I don't think it is. I really don't. I want to add one more parallel. So I was at a leadership meeting with Moon. And typically men sat on one side of the room and women were on the other side of the room.
Which is how Mormon temples are organized.
And I was sitting, and a black sister, her name was Patricia, was like within eye shot of me. and this is a speech that got printed up so I can document what I'm about to say. I'm paraphrasing. But he said, when you think about the races, the Orientals are blessed in the spiritual area, and Caucasians in the scientific area, and Black people in the area of physical education. You can know by how many Black people are in basketball. And I remember looking at her and she looking at me like, did we just hear what we just heard? Like, I grew up in Queens and it was very racially diverse place. So hanging out with Black people and Asian people was very normal for me as a child. But he was literally saying Black people, weren't intelligent and as a race. And I was like, what the?
Jack, racial.
Yeah, we could find quotes paralleling that quite easily.
Absolutely.
Well, you reminded me of that. Later, the Moonies did a big push to try to redo that image and started going to Black churches offering to buy them new roofs or what do you need in order to recruit Black people.
Steve, it was just announced this week that our current prophet, Russell M. Nelson, is receiving Martin Luther King award for racial healing.
Have we got to the bottom of that? Like, who's been paid?
I don't know.
Who is looking at Russell M. Nelson? It has to be paid for.
Yeah,
right?
it's really dirty.
But it's part of a rebranding.
It's rebranding. It's PR, public relations.
So the Moonies went through something very similar.
Yeah. So I want to also point out that that after this congressional investigation happened, they said we found so much wrongdoing that an interagency task force should be set up and they named about 6 or 7 branches of government, and nothing was ever done except for that he was engaged in a conspiracy to avoid paying income taxes, where he went to jail for 13 months. And the Moonies all believe he was persecuted because he was a religious Asian leader.
Lawrence Tribe.
But the reason I'm bringing it up is that when he went to jail, they did this huge rebranding. They spent $30 million in PR. And at that point, they said calling anyone a Moonie is like calling a Black person the N-word.
We've literally heard that around the Mormon rebrand.
Russell M. Nelson, as soon as he became prophet, said that using the term Mormon as a self-identification tool is a victory for Satan.
Wow.
And certain zealous Mormons on Twitter, I've seen them say that it's like calling a Black person the N-word. It's a slur.
Yeah. So I continue to talk about them as the Moonies because when I was in, Moon was so happy that we were called Moonies. We had cups with I Heart Mooney. I had T-shirts with I Love to Be a Mooney.
Didn't
and I'm
expect
like,
this level of parallels.
Down
to that nitty-gritty detail.
No, the Mormon Church had an I'm a Mormon campaign. And
$1 billion.
Meet the Mormons.
Times Square. I'm a Mormon.
Singing, I'm a Mormon. Yes, I am.
Yep.
And now it's evil. But it is when your church hits so much bad PR and gets such a bad reputation. And by the way, we just settled with the Security and Exchange Commission for a $5 million fine for deceiving the public
I don't know
and the membership
PR,
about our vast financial holdings.
You still talk about our.
I was raised Roman Catholic.
Yeah. I have a cultural Mormon for sure, and I still consider them as my people.
I find that interesting, John.
Me too, John.
Maybe we'll talk about
Someone in my corner around here.
But the point is, our reputation has gotten so problematic that it's got to be that getting rid of, eschewing the Mormon identity, like you say, like the Moonies, is an attempt to rebrand because it doesn't sell, right? The Mormon identity no longer sells.
Well, I would like to think from my perspective that your podcast, Mormon Stories podcast, played a role in them saying we need to not use the word Mormon anymore.
Well, of course I want to believe that.
No, I'm saying that not just I'm saying that as an observer of the field. But I didn't think of the Mormons as a mind control cult until the Ex-Mormon Foundation brought me out in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I met 250 former Mormons, many fourth, fifth generation. And I'm talking about the bite model, and they're like, everyone's nodding in the audience, like.
And that was right as I was going through my faith crisis. Like I went through my faith crisis in 2001. I remember Richard Packham and Sue.
Yeah,
and the Ex-Mormon Foundation.
That's who brought me out.
And I watched you give that talk right when I was going through my faith crisis. What year did you come out again?
I want to say it was 2002 or something like that. I also want to tell you the fellow who spoke after me blew my mind. I don't remember his name, but he had been a professor or a teacher at a Mormon Training Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of his talk, I'm sure the video is still online, was something like Deception as a Management Tool of the LDS Church.
Yeah.
And he did this presentation starting with all the lies from Joseph Smith. And he gets to the end where he has a recording of him with his boss where he is saying, so you're telling me that I have to lie to my students about the truth about Mormon history to keep my job? And the boss said, that's correct. And he said, well, I quit. That was the end of it. But when I listened to this lecture, I'm like, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, feathers like a duck. I guess it seems to really fit. I had always known, not always, but I saw a PBS special on the 2-year missionary training that was flat out like the Moonies. Like that was a mind control 2-year thing, but I needed to learn from former members more about mainstream Mormonism.
Yeah. One other parallel is that Joseph Smith was also incarcerated multiple times, like Mr. Moon.
Yes.
Except we one up you because Joseph Smith was killed sort of in an apocalyptic partners.
Yes, he had at least one child out of wedlock. His name is Sammy Pak, who was raised by Bogie Pak, his main translator, who was also the KCIA CIA liaison person in the South Korean embassy in the early 60s. So he had a child out of wedlock and was raised, and the kid didn't know until his 20s.
All right, so while we're giving you a break, Samantha,
he knew before
we've got a lot of
You're not
cool
even getting that
comments
story
coming
right.
in.
God, he's such a bad narrator.
Any thoughts or reflections, Samantha?
And that's such an important story.
I guess.
Like to just tell Sam Pak's story like that and to be so blasé and he didn't even know about it till he was in his 20s. It's really sad that the way he just kind of brushes by that, because Sam Pak's family, and I do encourage you to go back and listen to, because I have an interview, actually a presentation that Sam does, and talking about this and finding out that Moon was his father, and to discount the story as it's just, no, he knew as a teenager. That's when he found out Moon was his real father. They kept it a secret, him and his mother, and eventually he does go and live with her. And they still keep it a secret, even though Moon's other children learn about it, but the cult did not know. Yeah, so that's really sad the way he discounted that. Or not discounted it, but messed up the story and just kind of brushed it aside.
I just told Samantha the story of sushi, the Moonies and sushi that I learned from the New York Times Daily podcast about. I guess it says
it was in their magazine. I think it's online. It's an actual print thing, and then they did a
but I mean in the story, maybe so you knew Mr. Moon, like you met him and were in the room with him. You weren't
many times.
Yeah, and
the Holy Family, including the 2 sons who have a gun factory in Pennsylvania and a cult worshiping AR-15s.
Yeah,
we can talk about that tomorrow.
Okay, So I guess I was just telling her that according to the story, he just like gives $100 to like 100 of his followers and says, go start sushi restaurants throughout the world or throughout the United States. Long story short, they become the suppliers of sushi restaurants and corner like 60 to 80% of the sushi market, right?
Well, they have the largest fish processing plant in the world in Kodiak, Alaska. They have a boat building business. They were putting people out catching tuna off of Massachusetts, or out of Gloucester, because there were regulations, 1 tuna per boat. So they made these smaller boats, would send a member out, catch a tuna, come back in, send another boat out with a different member. Of course, the members were not given their pay because they were church members, so they would donate so they were undercutting legitimate fishermen way. There's so many illegal, immoral things that this group has been involved with, really a lot of devious, destructive, horrible things, including, funding terrorist groups and neo-Nazi types of operations in their quest to be anti-communist. And they're still world players to this day.
So that idea of unpaid labor, whether it's missionaries paying to be missionaries in the Mormon religion, or senior missionaries after they've retired, paying in their retirement to literally do corporate jobs for the church as a religious mission, but they're literally serving in corporate functions.
I think it violates labor law.
Yeah.
Labor trafficking law.
We want to say something, Samantha?
I just have a question, and maybe this is skipping ahead, if so we can put a pin in it, but is it scary to talk out about the Moonies? Because I was saying to John before, while you were away, if I was an ex-Scientologist, I wouldn't do a YouTube channel about Scientology. I'd just go quietly into the night. Mormonism is kind of one of those ones where you can get away with it. I mean, John has for 20 years without it being too much of a risk to your life. What's the deal with the Moonies? Because I know you mentioned earlier that you would have killed for them if you'd been asked to. Do they?
Well, I was thinking also about your comment about my allegiance to Korea, and the idea that the world would be speaking the Korean language only when Moon took over. I remember Moon saying that if North Korea invaded South Korea, they would send all the Americans to the front line to be martyrs to get America in a land war in Asia. I was like, yes, Father! Monse! Which is victory in Korea. Monse! So my story is that when I first left, they didn't believe I left because I was such a fanatical devotee.
I'm going to pause there because when he says they were so shocked I left and this and that, there is one book I kind of quote in, and I've read not just Dr. Stephen Hassan's books, but books that he was quoted on, original books, like when he got out of the cult, books that were doing some work on cults at that time, brick and mortar type cults. And this is where you can find the discrepancies in his stories. And I have a very good eye and attention to detail in picking out these things. And he tells a story, and he's told it several different places, and you just have to watch for it because he's kind of evolved and changed to, I think, what people want to hear from him. But he talks about being abandoned and how pissed off he was because they didn't even care that he broke his leg and that he was in the hospital. They kind of washed their hands of him and were like, whatever, and abandoned him. And that was one of the earlier stories that he told. And now it has evolved into these different stories that have snowballed. And I'll add that in and discuss that as well. The following excerpt is going to come from Prisoner Paradise, The New Religious Cults by James and Marcia Rudin. And this book was written in 1980, and it looks at new religious movements of that time. They looked at the Moonies, Scientology, Children of God, and various other cults that were around at that time and popping up. And they interviewed Dr. Stephen Hassan, and some other people had been in cults at that time and had gotten out. And they were looking at, things that were happening around that time because it was the explosions of these new religious movements within the United States. And when I came across this book, I wasn't necessarily looking for information about Dr. Stephen Hassan. It was in the beginning of my research. And I was looking for information about the Moonies. And everywhere you look for information about the Moonies, Dr. Stephen Hassan's there. So I came across this and I was like, well, that's interesting. So we're going to look at this here. So this is on page 38 and 39 of this book. And I would also like to mention that James and Marcia Rudin, Dr. Stephen Hassan does give them an acknowledgement in combating cult mind control in the older version, and it's in the updated. And they also write endorsements for his books as well. So there is a congenial relationship between them. Like Robert T., Stephen Hassan was attracted by the church's sense of being family. Yet one midnight in the spring of 1976, the family deserted Stephen when he rammed his car into the back of a truck on the Baltimore Beltway after 72 continuous hours of fundraising. Following the accident, he was taken to the hospital for an operation where he faced the possible amputation of his legs. Steve fully expected the family to assist him in his recovery, but instead, the Unification Church leaders contacted Steve's sister and parents and informed them of the accident. They rushed in to take care of him. His legs were saved, and during the long period of recuperation, he was deprogrammed and left the church. Steve is bitter when he remembers how quickly the church deserted him after his automobile accident. Quote, I deeply believe the group was a loving family that cared about its members. As soon as I was seriously injured and could no longer collect funds or recruit, the family called my satanic real family. The Moonies couldn't get rid of me fast enough. End quote. So there is a completely different story than what Stephen has told over the years. And this one, I believe, would be the freshest one in Steve's mind, the retelling of it, and maybe one of the most honest, because this book was written in 1980. I don't know when they would have interviewed him, but he got out, I think it's 1976. So this would have been 4 years after the fact. To me, that seems like that would probably be the most honest retelling of the story. But it goes on here. The church's seemingly unfailing behavior towards Steve is explained in one of its training manuals. The church follower is told precisely what to do when a friend is wounded or injured in the fight against Satan. If you leave him, the friend, he will die. If you help him, he won't die for now, but you will lose the battle. Not because you don't love your brother, but because you do love him. You must leave him and attack the enemy and subjugate the enemy, and afterwards come back, and maybe already he is dead. Then with tears, we embrace the dead body of our friend.
No. Can we just describe what your 3 years as a Moonie were like before we talk about you leaving it? We'll come right to that as the exact next thing. But like, what major roles did you play for the Moonies?
You'll have to remind me to come back.
We will for sure.
Okay.
But just for the chronology, like, what roles did you play? What things did you do? What were your observations of Mr. Moon? And how scary and dangerous and troubling did it get? And then we'll talk about how you left. And then we'll talk about Samantha's question.
So I was almost always in New York at Queens or Manhattan. I was
voted up pretty fast. I never had any power. I was given, title.
I was mostly involved with recruiting and indoctrinating people. I did some political activism, for example, fasting for Nixon during Watergate, because God
I have a
said
lot of these pictures.
he
There were
wants
hundreds of
Nixon to
people
be
there. He wasn't,
president
like,
despite
the only one.
Watergate. And a quick funny story with my dad, who had voted for Nixon. I voted for McGovern and said, Nixon's a crook. Like, how could you vote for this creep? I thought wrongly as a Moonie that he would be pleased that I was supporting Nixon. I called him from Washington.
He calls his dad from Washington, but supposedly they weren't supposed to call any of their family members who said that they were in a cult and that Moon wasn't right for them, but he calls his dad. And then he'll tell the story about how he gets out of the Moonies. Like, a lot of his stories that he tells don't really make sense to me in the way he presents it. I don't know. Here we go.
And I said, I'm fasting for Nixon. He says, Steve, you were right. He's a crook. I'm like, no, Dad, you don't understand. God wants him to be president. He's like, Steve, he's a crook. Now I know you're brainwashed. In any case, so back to my things. I was in charge of transportation for a 7-day fast in front of the United Nations through a front group that had been concocted to try to get them to stop to stop a motion to withdraw UN troops for human rights violations in South Korea. That was successful. But mostly I was telling them how to recruit Americans and telling them, what would work and what wouldn't work. And I was sent to set up CARP at Queens College. Then I was made to be assistant director of the Flushing Center. Then Moon decided he would move the national headquarters from D.C. to New York to be closer to him. He didn't like the president of the Moonies because he was thought too much for himself.
What do you mean the president of the Moonies?
The guy named Neil Salonen was the American.
Now, this part I really questioned the more that I researched Dr. Stephen Hassan and learned about Neil Salonen, because he has been an integral part prior to Steve arriving and throughout the whole time in the Moonies, up until including not just but a few years ago when he retired from being president of Bridgeport University in Connecticut, which was one of the colleges where the Moonies bailed it out. They were into bankruptcy and they forgave the loans. And I do a big background on that too as well. So the way Steve tells his story, it's this, I think he wants to be perceived as more important. And yeah, he was around these people. It was the early founding of, not the early founding, but the early movement of the Moonies in the United States. But they already had a foothold here from the other people I talk about, the two groups in California that had come here and set up things. And I think honestly, Stephen's roles come down to he got put in charge of some fundraising, a group of people who had to go out and fundraising. And, he was the person in charge of keeping an eye on that after a while. And he definitely set up CARP. I can believe those two aspects. But I think I think this story has just got embellished and blown up over the years.
Head of the Unification Church. And so the headquarters was moved up, and I was told to be the internal Abel to Neil Salonen, Abel and Cain, like I was going to be his superior. And they wanted him to learn from me how to be obedient and mindless, basically. So I was assistant director of Church 10 at national headquarters.
Wait, so Moon put the leader of the Moonies in the U.S. under you?
Spiritually.
Wow. When you're like 20?
I'm going to look at a book called Gifts of Deceit, Sun Myung Moon, Tongsan Park, and the Koreagate Scandal. It's from 1980, and it's on, it discusses Koreagate and the Fraser Committee. It's by Robert Bocher and Gordon L. Freeman. And Bocher was staff director to the House Subcommittee on International Relations, which headed the Fraser investigation. That's the one that Stephen Hassan talks about all the time. And Gordon Freeman served on the U.S. Senate Watergate Committee. He was part of the staff. So we're going to pick up a little bit here and talk about Kamiyami, who is the leader that Stephen Hassan talks about all the time. And Bocher takes quotes from Dr. Stephen Hassan. He interviews him. There's a lot of footnotes in this book. A lot of this information comes from Stephen Hassan giving the subcommittee this information. So they had to go through lawyers and things of that nature. So it's a well-sourced book. So take with that what you will when I present the information and reading from this book, passage from this book. Here we go. He had worked loyally and hard, and he became one of Kamiyama's favorites. Kamiyama adored him so much that when Moon moved the national headquarters of the church to Manhattan from Washington, Hassan was placed in a newly formed church unit inside the national headquarters for the purpose of setting an example for Salonen and others to follow. Kamiyama wanted them to demonstrate, quote, the Japanese standard of sacrifice and devotion. So right there, he did not want him to be anything other for Neil Salonen, and it was for others. It was for him to be the Japanese standard of sacrifice and devotion. So yeah, Kamiyama did value him, and he did think that Stephen Hassan was, displaying all of these great qualities that he saw in him. But it wasn't to put him under this leadership role or like to be this Cain to Abel kind of thing, and I know they did use those kind of relationship things, within the Moonies. But the way that Stephen Hassan always presents it, it was like he was there and he was under Neil Salonen. And no, and this is right here in the book, that Hassan was placed in a newly formed church unit inside the national headquarters. It was a newly formed unit inside the national headquarters, so there's a new unit there, for the purpose of setting an example for Salonen and others to follow. Kamiyama wanted them to demonstrate, quote, the Japanese standard of sacrifice and devotion. And it goes on. Hassan experienced feelings of great achievement. His life had a worthwhile purpose. In less than a year, he had come so far, yet he was still so young, and it was recognized by those he had come to respect. Hence, he never expected to hear what Kamiyama said to him at a meeting with all regional commanders assembled. Quote, you are having spiritual problems now. It's better you go out fundraising. Spiritual problems? What had he done wrong? He lived by the divine principle. It was his guide for every thought, word, and deed. All questions left his mind after not more than a split second. As he bowed his head as reverent obedience, his only remaining thought was, quote, dear God, not as I will, but as you will. Quote, it's all right, Kamiyama said. Quote, you don't have to fundraise. He then turned to the regional commanders and stated, quote, this is your model for sacrifice and devotion. It was a test like God's test of Abraham's faith when he had ordered him to sacrifice his only son Isaac. Hassan had passed, and he felt joy, not relief. Kamiyama was right. Hassan was a model. The cult had fully conquered his mind. When Hassan did go fundraising again several months later, it was a promotion, not an indemnity for spiritual problems. He worked in Manhattan, Pennsylvania, and Baltimore as the head of model fundraising team, whose proceeds went to a special project picked by Moon exclusively. As always, a special Japanese, quote, team mother was sent to live with the group to cook, sew, clean house, and encourage cohesion. Her real purpose was to spy for Kamiyama by writing him detailed reports regularly. Hassan's fundraisers were out hawking flowers or candy from dawn until midnight, or later if the quotas were not met. They worked the streets, supermarkets, parking lots, offices, airports, gay bars, straight bars, discotheques, factories, house to house. They identified themselves as whatever seemed likely to elicit cash from a person's pocket. Sometimes a more direct approach was used by crawling along the floor in a bar or restaurant, popping up at a table to pin a flower on a woman's dress and saying to her escort, quote, that will be $2, please. A surprising number of people paid. If the man became angry and called a waiter, Hassan made a quick dash across the floor to the far corner so he could keep working, if not caught and ejected. If thrown out, he tried to slip in again and take up where he left off. Change was sometimes hard to get once money was in a Mooney's hand. If a Mooney was handed a $10 bill, it could be a $10 contribution if unattended. Ancestors acting through the contribution were paying indemnity. At the airports, one Mooney got $1 for pinning a flower on a nun. Discovering the solicitor was a Mooney, the nun's niece returned the flower and demanded the $1 back. There was no refund. The niece had another 20 minutes before her plane departed, so she followed the Mooney around the airport, telling people, don't buy anything from the girl. She just stole $1 from a nun. Hassan's team took in $1,000 a day. Twice each week, he took the cash to a bank and wired it directly to the Unification Church account at Chemical Bank in New York. He was never told what the money was used for or how much was raised nationwide. He has since estimated conservatively that on the basis of 1,000 Moonies collecting $75 a day per person, the annual gross would be about $28 million. 1,000 fundraisers and $75 per day are low base figures. However, $100 was the minimum expected per fundraiser per day, and 1/3 of the Mooney membership is supposed to be out fundraising all of the time. So that's a little insight into Stephen and his relationship to fundraising and why I tend to believe that fundraising was a big part of what Stephen was doing and that he was generally really good at it. And the Kamiyama trusted him and he saw how devoted he was to it, but that he really wasn't put there to watch Neil Salonen or anything in that matter. And I'm going to list here briefly all of the things at the time and within this book, and it is of record, that Neil Salonen was in charge of and documents that he was put on. Neil Salonen, President, Unification Church of the USA, Secretary General, Freedom Leadership Foundation, Director, International Oceanic Enterprises, Director, Tong Tu Enterprises, Investor, Diplomat, National Bank, Director, International Cultural Foundation, Director, One Up Enterprises. Now, I also want people to keep in mind, this is the same man that goes on to become president of Bridgeport University up until a couple years ago, where he retired from there. And that was the university that the Moonies helped bail out. They gave him the loan, forgave it. Like, he's always been an integral part of the Moonies. And I feel like I have to keep repeating myself, but I absolutely believe that Steve Hassan had an authentic recruitment experience with the Moonies. I absolutely believe that, he did go through all of these things. I just believe that he has puffed up his story, a fishtail over time, and I don't think that he has needed to do that. I don't know why. I have my own thoughts and opinions on that, but his story in itself is enough to tell, and he could have just done that over the years. I just don't understand why people do these things. I really don't.
But you have to understand, I was really a good Moonie. I'll give you a quick story. So the Moonies will also do a lot of street fundraising. They were making $30 million a year in cash, selling chocolates, candies, candles, flowers, lying, saying it was for Christian youth programs.
Superstition.
And so for ego deconstruction, even leaders were sent out to do fundraising. So, you couldn't complain. You had to just follow the orders and be obedient and do your job. So it's pouring rain. It's the west side of Manhattan, and I'm at a stoplight, and I see this Lincoln Continental over there. It stopped at the red light, and I recognize it's father and mother. It's a Saturday night. I run over to the car. You have to get this image. This guy's bowing to a Lincoln Continental, where the passengers are. The window comes down. He's beaming, smiling, and I'm like, "Father, mother, would you like chocolate or would you like mints?" "Oh, give me the chocolate. Here's a 20. And he gives me a $20 bill and takes it. And then the window goes up. He drives off. He's going, I guess, to the theater or something. And then the next morning, Sunday morning, which was the typical gathering of all the membership, he says, "And if you're pure in heart, you might get a blessing, like Steve Hassan did last night." And then he describes it to the membership, and everyone's like, "Oh, you fundraised the Messiah?" It's like, yes, it's what God wanted me to do. But you have to, I'm painting this picture that I was just really a true believer. Like, if I'd stayed in for 10 years, would I have still been that fanatical? I don't know. I don't think so, but I could have been. But
I think you would have been.
I lost my train of thought. What was I saying before?
You were going through all the different roles.
Oh yeah, so mostly I was in leadership and thinking about how and Moon was giving talks about infiltrating Congress and how we need to control the government and how democracy was satanic and and so. And then a very odd thing happened that didn't make sense until much later after my deprogramming. But I was lecturing at a lecture hall opposite the main public library in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue. And I was given a stipend, and I decided to go and buy some history textbooks. Remember I mentioned earlier about the historical time parallels and how I said, go to the library and check it out. These parallels are true. So I thought I would bolster my lecture with some facts from these books. And I asked my leader, I said, excuse me, but this history textbook doesn't support the divine principle. And within a few hours, I was pulled aside and told that they just found out my parents were trying to kidnap me and deprogram me. It was crucial that I leave the New York immediately and go to Pennsylvania. And I never put the two together until years later that I had pointed out the crack in the wall that would have blown up the belief that this was the truth. It was an intentional lie, right? But they distracted me. They put me on a fundraising team. Then they made me the head of a fundraising team. And it was in that period that my leader said everyone on my team had to make a minimum of $100 a day, otherwise they couldn't sleep. And me being the good leader, if my members didn't sleep, I wouldn't sleep either. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night normally. Now I'm up for almost 3 days with no sleep. And I wake up as I'm driving into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, slam on the brakes. The thing's a pancake and they have to rescue me. And when this comes back to the question about am I afraid of being assassinated? Because when I first left, they literally went like this to me when I was out protesting one of the mass weddings. But I had survived this.
By the way, that's a sign that I did in the Mormon temple, slitting my throat.
Oh, as proof that
as a threat that we assign to ourselves if we ever divulge the secrets of the temple.
Oh, that's a good, not good one, but that's a relevant point to this story. But I kind of felt like I should have died in that van crash. Like the people who saved my lives, so they thought it would blow up, were like, you're alive. It's amazing that you lived through it. So I kind of had my brush with death, and I've kind of made my peace with death. So I've never been afraid with death threats. And I'm like, bring it on.
Right.
The more you harass me, the more I'm going to speak out. And I made a very deliberate, conscious decision to make an ex-member group. So if I died, it would be clear other people would speak. So it wouldn't just be silenced. I also, go ahead.
So
from combating cult mind control. After that, Moon's political influence began to grow. When Ronald Reagan became president, Moon-controlled groups began funding the new right political movement in Washington. When it was clear the federal government would do nothing about the Moonies, I decided to organize. I started a group called Ex-Members Against Moon, later Ex-Moon Inc. I sponsored press conferences, edited a monthly newsletter, and gave numerous interviews. I had considered starting a group of former members from many different cult groups, but I decided that with the release of the congressional investigation, it would be more effective for me to focus on the Moomies. I found an article from the Cedar Rapids Gazette from July 2nd, 1982. And it is about the Reverend Sun Myung Moon doing a mass wedding of 4,150 people. And I wanted to find something where Stephen Hassan was talking as president of Ex-Moon Inc. So he's quoted in this article. Steve Hassan, president of Ex-Moon Inc., a group of former Moon followers, suggested Moon had arranged the wedding extravaganza to draw attention from his legal problems. He is appealing a conviction on charges of filing false tax returns for 3 years. One speaker at the wedding alluded to the church's problems, and then the article goes on. But I did want to include some record historically that Stephen Hassan, talking as the representative and president of Ex-Moon Inc. This is from Dr. Stephen Hassan's resume on PIPATL, and it's from 2017. And we will discuss this think tank when we get further along into what he's doing today in his career. 1979 to 1981. Founder and first president of Ex-Moon Inc., a nonprofit educational corporation serving as an information and support network for over 400 former cult members. Edited and published a monthly newsletter with a circulation of over 1,000. Gave hundreds of interviews, sponsored and participated in news conferences, lectures, and seminars about the Moonies. No longer in operation.
So So thank you for sharing that.
And this is where I say Stephen started out altruistic. He did start the nonprofit. It's a now defunct group, X Moon Inc. And you can go and look it up, and the filings are there, and it closing and everything. And he'll tell the story. I can't remember which book it is or which research thing I got into about X Moon Inc. and his story. But he was tired of not making money. It was draining him. And he decided to go to school. Was it to get his master's degree? I believe so, because he did finish college, and I believe it was to go and get his master's degree. And he had met Lifton and things of that nature, and he had done some forcible deprogramming, and then he switched to, other forms where, that wasn't taking place. And I do believe he was altruistic in the beginning, but once he saw there was a profit to him speaking out and getting attention in the media, and his book after he wrote it and it came out, that's all he saw afterwards. And I still think he held on to some of that altruistic nature, but it's gone now. And I witnessed that. I'll dig up the space too, and I'll put that in here. I'll have to find it because I have Space's dashboard. But it was a space, and I can't remember the topic. And I want to say it was Pam Hemphill's space.
I don't need new tires, but stay tuned for the next episode.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump. Da, 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 da.
If shit goes wrong, I will literally have to leave the country.
Stop that.
I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Good night. Nighty night.